Alright, we got the top 10 of 2024. Yeah, I know it's really late, but better late than never, right? Yeah, 2024 was a very good year for movies, so I just thought this would be fun. Talk about my favorite ones. There were quite a few that I saw that didn't make the list, obviously. Some of them you'll be seeing on screen right now, because I didn't want to spoil the list. I'm just going to rattle them off right now. We got Hard Truths, Look Back, The Apprentice, The Substance, The Girl with the Needle, Small Things Like These, Dune Part 2, A Different Man, Kinds of Kindness, and Sing Sing, which just barely didn't make the list. Also, I gotta say, not a lot of foreign language stuff this year. There are still a few that I haven't seen, though, that are supposed to be really good. Well, anyway, here's the list. The list is here. Number 10 is Nosferatu, directed by Robert Eggers. And yeah, I really like this movie. I thought it was a little bit underrated, honestly. Maybe it wasn't what people were like expecting from Robert Eggers, but like I'm fine with him picking up an old IP, a really old IP, and maybe the most faithful readaptation of the story, although I haven't seen Werner Herzog's version. And pretty faithful to the imagery as well. There were quite a few really cool callbacks to like the shadow work in that first movie, that German expressionism coming through, the shot of like his hand reaching, that whole stuff, and also took it to some pretty cool, inventive places at times. Shot of the town in the shadow, which may have been a miniature, but maybe also CG. I'm not entirely sure. I wouldn't be surprised if it was CG instead of a miniature, because that would probably be a really gigantic miniature. Anyway, yeah, one of my favorite things about this movie is probably the cinematography. Really expressive lighting and color grading, and very clearly calling back to the silent era and the kind of tints and monochromes that they would use back then, although obviously updated in a significant way. There were some scenes and set pieces that were just absolutely gorgeous in their atmosphere as well as their color, like the road sequence with the carriage, and really great production design and costumes as well. Doesn't look overproduced. Robert Eggers is really good at like making these kind of dirty feeling movies that came through with like The Lighthouse and The Northman, and a lot of cool shots as well. There's a lot of long takes throughout this movie where the camera really like reframes the characters in interesting ways, and they're long takes in ways that you don't necessarily notice because it's just so dynamic throughout and it's constantly doing something new. I do like the second half quite a bit more than the first half. Some of the atmosphere that's built up in the first half is definitely pretty intriguing, although there are a lot more like jump scares. I saw it in the movie theater, and yeah, that kind of got a jolt out of me, I guess, just due to the high volume and giant screen of everything, but they were a little bit cheap at times. Pretty much the scene when Willem Dafoe shows up, and as soon as they're like describing the character who he is before he actually shows up on screen, you're probably already gonna know it's Willem Dafoe if you've seen the cast beforehand. But yeah, when he shows up in the movie, that's basically when things really take off for me. He's awesome. His chemistry with Ralph Ineson and what's his name? Aaron Taylor. Yeah, Aaron Taylor Johnson. Those three just like bounce off each other really well in this movie. That was super entertaining to watch, and all their sort of like different perspectives on the whole thing. Definitely the best performance I've seen from Aaron Taylor Johnson so far. And it's cool that you kind of have to throw your own sort of like inherent modern biases out the window to kind of buy this movie, because the other characters are trying to approach this from like a scientific angle. Bill Skarsgård as Count Orlok as well. He has a great voice throughout the whole thing. Lily Rose Depp was good too. Maybe a little bit hard to take seriously at times, but you know, she still basically sold the whole thing for the most part. Yeah, I don't think this is a perfect movie or anything. I do think it's flawed. I don't think it's that scary necessarily, as much as it's just really interesting and well put together and very entertaining once you get to that second half. But you know, those highs basically beat out some of like my criticisms with the film overall. And I gotta say, the last scene especially, the makeup, all the makeup effects in that scene are just pretty mind-blowing. Okay, number 9 is Conclave. This was a big surprise. I was not expecting to love this movie, really. It seemed like just kind of a dumb Pope movie for the Oscars or something, but it was actually a thrill ride in ways that I was not expecting. Yeah, I didn't take it like the most seriously overall. I didn't think it was like the most like demands your every ounce of like your emotional investment necessarily, but I thought it was juicy, that's for sure. It was just like a fun, almost like gossipy kind of film, you know? A lot of gossip throughout, a lot of intrigue. You know, the boys are trying to elect a new pope and they're all kind of covertly fighting against each other, and like the dynamics keep switching throughout. You learn more and more about all the different characters and their angles and everything. A lot of twists and turns, really keeps you on edge. And especially if you're like watching it at home with like a friend, it's really fun to like commentate over and like pick apart and react out loud and be like, oh, wasn't expecting that, and oh, what's this character gonna do now? Yeah, it was just fun. It was a fun ass movie, and also really well made for the most part as well. The production design is really impressive. I'm assuming they're like taking direct inspiration from how like the Vatican looks in real life, and yeah, very unique kind of setting. All the marble is really nice looking, all very well framed and well lit as well. The colors are sharp, the red really pops out, the texture of that marble looks really cool. Ray Fiennes does a good job. He didn't do anything to like blow me away necessarily. I don't think it's like his best performance ever, but the chemistry with him and all the other Pope guys like John Lithgow and some of the baddies as well. It was nice to see Isabella Rossellini show up. It was very fun. Some of the most fun I've had with any movie this year. The twist at the end I thought was well earned. I think it really paid off. I know some people might have thought it was kind of a cop-out maybe, but I thought it worked just fine. Yeah, I saw it like a while ago, so like some of it might not be the most fresh. There isn't tons to like pick apart or anything if I'm not talking spoilers, but it was just a good time. Number 8 is Flow. I really loved Flow. Good year for animation overall. Insanely impressive how this movie was made on like Blender for very little money, and it looks really freaking good for the most part. Maybe there are a few characters, some of the dogs don't look like the tightest perhaps, but they're in the movie less, so it kind of makes sense. But yeah, all the like physics and everything, the color palette was gorgeous, the art style, and I just really engrossed myself in these characters, even though there's obviously no dialogue. It's just animals, and they don't talk, thank God. Yeah, it really worked for the most part. And you're never like in disbelief that this is like a cat or anything. They never act like super like intelligent for like a cat or make like human decisions or anything. You still buy that they're animals that are reacting to things in animal type ways, and it all just kind of makes sense. Yeah, and just one of the most riveting like emotional experiences I've had with a movie this year, I gotta say. Yeah, everything this little cat was going through, I was really rooting for the little guy the whole time. I loved their relationship with all the other characters too, and how those kind of developed throughout. And they're all really distinct too, from the capybara to the stork, I guess, if it is a stork, I'm not entirely sure, the bird guy. I love what they all bring. And something I really especially loved about this movie was the score. A lot of these scenes would work on their own probably, but like the score just really heightened those emotions and made the scene like hit how they're supposed to. Like there's some genuinely terrifying and also kind of tear-inducing scenes just due to like how beautiful some of these chord progressions are, and just like how they're used and how simplistic they are at the same time. Like it's not doing anything crazy, and it's obviously not like the orchestra that you'd expect from a big budget movie or anything, but I like that. I like the kind of stripped back nature of it. Some of those scenes and just how they incorporate that music just really brought it to that extra level for me. And the director and animator and editor also has a composer credit too, which is just kind of mind-blowing to me. He's a super talented guy, and I hope I see another project from him soon. Really glad that they won the Oscar. Wasn't necessarily my favorite out of that selection, but I cannot get mad at that win at all. Super cool. And all of the metaphorical stuff just really resonated with me as well. Just the journey that they all go on, the emotions that I guess it kind of makes you face, and how human it comes across and how relatable it is despite there being no human characters and also no dialogue throughout the whole thing. And some really beautiful like surreal imagery thrown in there as well that I was not expecting, which I won't spoil because I just think it'd be better to see that for yourself, and it does come in like a later point in the movie. And also just like a good runtime too. Definitely not too long, very tight. You know, obviously there are like budgetary restrictions there, but I don't think it needed to be any longer or any shorter. Thought it was just perfect. Number 7 is Nickel Boys. I almost feel kind of bad that this wasn't higher up on the list, honestly, because there are things about it that are just so so fantastic and so forward-thinking and unique. It did take me a while to kind of click with it. There was a little portion of the movie where its style kind of kept me a bit disconnected from it. I thought it was a little bit hard to take seriously at times with the first person thing, just like in the first little chunk of it, I guess. So it took me a while to really get on board with it, but once you kind of get used to its style, it really started to win me over. And the whole thing is just devastating in a way that is definitely earned. A very weird pace for a film, very weird edit, but I think it works really well. The use of imagery is just stunning for the most part. The fact that it didn't get an editing nom is just like crazy to me, especially with how experimental it becomes towards the end without spoiling anything. It just keeps like doing more and more interesting things in a way that just feels like it's trying to push cinema in like a new and interesting direction. The dynamic with the two lead characters I really love, especially watching it grow over the course of the movie. It feels like just a really genuine perspective on these issues and this like point in history. It's not trying to like oversell anything or like oversell any emotions. It's very blunt and raw and realistic and very detailed as well in terms of how these characters are like affected by everything. There are shots in here that are so impressive and like a how'd they do it kind of way. Obviously the kind of iconic one at this point that's on the cover of the film, that's one of the best shots in the film for sure. Not just for like how out there and difficult it must have been to get, or at least like, you know, creatively demanding, but also just how it feeds into the emotions of everything in the character. It's not just showing off, you know, it's doing everything for a very clear purpose. It is long though. It did take a little bit of patience to get through, I will say. There were points when I was kind of falling out of focus with it a little bit. But like I said, the second half is a lot more engaging for me than the first, I would say. Yeah, Nickel Boys, good ass movie. Okay, number 6 is I Saw the TV Glow. Bonkers movie. You were talking about Nosferatu earlier, and I said that it didn't really scare me that much. Can't say the same about this one. No, sir. In fact, you know, there aren't a lot of movies that scare me, period. I'm pretty resilient to all of them. In fact, if I had to think of some, it would be hard to even, like, come up with any, like, horror movies. Like, when I think of, like, a really scary scene, I think of, like, the stabbing scene in Zodiac or something, which isn't even a horror film at all. But this movie, something about it, man. There's some scenes, some shots that are just burned into my brain and just, yeah, really fucked up and legitimately horrifying. So that's something that I can definitely praise a movie over. Something that I definitely don't come into contact with very often. But other than that, I mean, it's an amazing fucking trans movie too. We don't have a lot of those, but the few that we do, this one especially, there's not a lot that really like break down like the psychology of queerness, I guess, and transness and repression that in ways that this movie has. It's so deep, for lack of a better word. It's like the general like emotional feel of it is really interesting and unique. The dynamic between two leads is not something that you'd imagine in a lot of movies, period. There's like an awkwardness to it and a coldness to it, and like a sort of like teenage angst, which can kind of be difficult to really, I guess, immerse yourself in. But when you think about like what it's doing and like how it's trying to get like this really specific kind of feeling across, it actually really works, at least for me. I like how these characters kind of keep to themselves and don't really know how to connect properly a lot of the time. It honestly kind of reminds me of like friendships that I've had growing up. The general aesthetic is really great, I think. I love all of like the bright pinks and everything, all of the glowing as well, the weird like kind of horror shots that have like that VHS quality to it that really like sells the uncanniness. I like how much stuff is kind of left ambiguous and isn't really indulged in. The emotions still come across really clearly, like the main character's relationship with like their father, or I guess stepfather, which is something that also was a thing with this director's other movie, We're All Going to the World's Fair, which I don't like nearly as much as this one. I wish I liked it a lot more. But there was sort of that aspect of the parent sort of in the background, but still very much a part of like how the emotions play out. And it's also cool that this movie kind of like restricts you of certain things throughout and pulls back a lot with like when characters appear and then disappear, and it leaves you like longing for certain things within the film. And like there's a sense of longing throughout the whole movie, and a sense of losing something or missing a chance to do something. There's a musical performance in the middle of the film that was awesome and very much reminded me of David Lynch. Kind of wore that influence on its sleeve, but in a good way. And I wish more movies just had musical numbers in the middle that sort of lead into like a new section of the movie in that sort of way. But maybe if too many movies did it would start getting tired after a while. Maybe it's good that it's kind of a rarity. Yeah, like I said, just genuinely terrifying at certain moments throughout, which I love, and is also a rarity. So yeah, gotta express my love for this one. I wish more people saw it, and I wish it was more of a thing, but you know, enough people did. I feel like it's definitely got its own fan base at this point, which is very earned. And I can't wait to see what this director does next. Number 5 is Memoir of a Snail. Memoir of a Stale Pale Snail. Sarah Snook, everybody, doing a voice performance, and she's so great. Her character has so much heart. There are scenes where you can like feel her smiling as she's delivering her lines. Just such a wonderful performance, and such a weird movie. I was familiar with this director before. I've seen Mary and Max and everything, but this one really kind of clicked with me. It's also very funny, but in some of the weirdest ways out of any movie this year, probably. Such like morbid humor and like tragic humor, but it all works like super well. It all kind of fits with like the aesthetic of kind of zany, wonky, but also like dusty and dreary kind of animation, and very, very impressive animation at that. There are certain points where it's just boggling my mind to try and think of like how they would have pulled some of this off practically. That's what really like heightens the whole experience for me. All the stuff on screen that you just ogle at, and how far they lean into this like super specific aesthetic, and having it really work for them and help it tell this super entertaining and genuine story at its core, with so many fun quirks that just kind of endear me to the whole thing. And part of what makes it a really fun time is just how free it feels, like structurally. It feels like it can just take you somewhere like totally unexpected through like a flashback or a cutaway kind of scene, and it always feels exciting and colorful, and like it always wants to show you something new and interesting, and get totally silly in the process, but also incredibly dark and fucked up at times as well. Such an interesting take on an animated movie. Kind of similar to what I said about Flow, like it feels like it's taking animated film in like a really interesting direction that it feels like we've kind of forgotten what that potential is recently with how we think about animation and how we kind of just pigeonhole it into like kids movies, basically. This is obviously far from a kids movie, but still has a lot of kind of childlike whimsy at its core, and that feels right for like telling the story of this person's life. And obviously the whole thing is very autistic as well, which is just lovely. One thing I will say about this film is that I didn't necessarily get like tons out of it on a rewatch. When I first watched Memoir of a Snail, it was my favorite movie of the year so far, and on the first version of this list it was like all the way at number 2, I think. And since then it has fallen back a little bit, because compared to the rest of the movies that we're gonna cover, which I've gotten much more out of on a rewatch, I didn't really get much more out of this one. And number 4 is The Brutalist. I've actually already talked about this movie in like a kind of podcasty format with my partner in a video that probably should be uploaded by the time this one comes out, but still haven't done that right now because I'm just so great at getting things done. But I guess I'll just reiterate some of my thoughts here. Overall, over the course of its 3.5-hour runtime, this is a movie that really hooks me in the first half, kind of loses me a little bit in like the third quarter, and then really brings it back by the ending. It's a movie that I kind of read as a little bit too ambitious for its own good the first time I watched it, but after revisiting it more times, I've really started to understand and appreciate what Brady Corbet was trying to say with this movie. And it's grown on me a lot, especially the ending, which I've come around to more than any other part of the film. At first I really didn't like it, and now I kind of think it's great. It's one of the most ambitious movies I've ever seen for a $10 million budget, which is just crazy. Incredibly well made, gorgeous looking, very, which is nice considering that brutalist architecture is almost the opposite of that. But still, it does sort of live up to the title as well. It does feel as large and as unapologetically structured as a lot of brutalist architecture kind of does. It moves in such a kind of hefty way, but it's extremely entertaining throughout. It's one of the fastest moving 3.5-hour movies I've seen in a long time. The performances, of course, are some of the best of the year, especially between Brody and Pierce. That's not really a groundbreaking take or anything. And speaking of performances, it's got the kind of long take approach that really just emphasizes the performances in a really effective and kind of humble way, which is kind of similar to how I felt about Nosferatu as well, where you kind of forget it's a oneer and the camera's just sort of there and not drawing a lot of attention to itself. That said, there are a lot of visually ambitious scenes as well, especially that opening shot, which is definitely one of the highlights for me of the whole film, especially with that score, which is equally ambitious. It's got tons of different tones and they all complement the film really well. Kind of experimental and industrial, which I really love, and I guess it kind of makes sense given Brady Corbet's working relationship with the musician Scott Walker in his past few movies, which I assume is kind of informing some of the ideas and the scoring of this movie. Anyway, there's not a lot more to say about it at this point that hasn't already been said by myself included. I know it's kind of divisive for some people, and I don't even like every aspect of it. There are things that I kind of criticize, but there are like amazing highs and so many memorable sections of the movie that I just can't really deny. So there it is. Number 3 is Anora, directed by Sean Baker. Yeah, this was definitely my most hyped movie of the year, and it did not disappoint. Perhaps not my favorite Sean Baker movie of all time. It's definitely up there. It was Sean Baker with like a budget, I guess. I guess what's really different about this movie compared to his other ones is like the structure. I guess with some of his other movies like Tangerine and Red Rocket, everything feels very lived in. It's all very patient and immersive. But this movie is much quicker, and that kind of threw me for a loop at first, because the first like big chunk of this is all like montages and glitz and glamour. Yeah, I was just kind of sitting there like, okay, I like the pace of this and everything, I like the vibe, I like the filmmaking, but I don't really feel like I know the characters as well. But once the whole thing kind of falls into place, then the whole like shallow aspect of it is kind of by design, because you are following kind of a shallow character who's kind of caught up in this dream of wealth and, like I said, glamour, and it really sells her ambition and her want to just follow this guy to the ends of the earth basically. But once you get to that like second half and everything kind of starts to go a different way, then it kind of recontextualizes everything else before that point. Yeah, on the second watch, the parts when like I was kind of waiting for something to develop a little bit more the first time I watched it, the second time I was totally there for it, and it all went by super quick, and it feels just like a really nice build up to like where everything goes later on. And yeah, at this point it just kind of feels like Sean Baker has really perfected this like kind of trashy style of filmmaking at this point, and writing especially, with the dialogue and how everything feels kind of off the cuff. Yeah, I've just always admired how like real and chaotic his movies feel, while also being very like controlled and like funny at the same time. It's all very like comically structured while also still just like feeling very genuine. Like there are certain people in this movie, like the judge character, who just feel like they could have just walked into a courtroom and like shot that scene. I wouldn't be surprised if that guy is just a non-actor.
Nora Mihail.
Dress my fucking ass. Okay.
Whoa!
And of course also he likes to highlight very real like experiences that don't usually get much attention in fiction and filmmaking. And it's such an interesting like world to explore, like how America sort of like creates this seediness and how it also kind of fails to nurture it and like stigmatizes it for everybody. I've heard a lot of people compare Sean Baker's work to like Italian neo-realism, which I totally get, with the casting of non-actors, putting more of an emphasis on the struggles of like everyday people, shooting on location, and yelling. Lots and lots of yelling.
Ты будешь будешь уволен, нахуй, стерт с лица земли, бля. Сука! I gotta get a water before I leave because I'm gonna be thirsty!
Bro, you gotta go, man.
I bought this ashtray! No, I said what I got!
Stia tranquilla.
No, perché a me quelli mi interessano, se permetti.
Signora, io ho tanto da fare. Stia
so,
tranquilla. E poi il fotografo sono io.
And there's always sort of an interesting, like, subtle kind of political, like, economic aspect, like kind of under the surface with the Russian oligarch aspect. Just like an odd kind of dark thing to have in there. It kind of reminds me in Red Rocket how it's set in Texas City by all of like the oil refineries and everything. And that's just always present and always kind of hinted at. I do prefer the cinematography in his last movie, but you know, different approaches for different vibes and everything. The lavishness definitely works for this movie. His edits are always so snappy and just like brimming with personality. You can always like feel his voice in how he edits his movies, and he's talked about that before. It's like he sort of finds the film in the editing process, and you can really feel that. And all the actors did such a great job too. There's loudness, but there's also like subtlety from Yura Borisov, for example, who's just such a joy to pay attention to while you're watching this movie. And you got a lot of like old Sean Baker cast people just kind of showing up in like small roles, which is really fun to see. Of course, Karen Karagulian, he sells his character super well, and there's great like implied history between like him and the boy love interest character. Kind of trippy to see him on like the Oscars stage, considering how long he's been working with Sean Baker across like all of his super low budget movies. And of course he got that ending. Man, my man knows how to cut to black, that's for sure. Yeah, overall just like exhilarating movie, at times stressful, at times incredibly fun and gut-bustingly funny, and even cozy in certain corners as well, but ultimately quite deeply sad at the same time, which is what makes Sean Baker's movies so special. Number 2 is Challengers. Yeah, this is probably the most excited I've been to talk about any of these movies, because this movie is goddamn blood pumping. Had no reason to be as good as it was, but it is firing on like all cylinders, honestly. It has so much going for it. It is so unique, and pretty much every aspect they just hit it out of the park, honestly. Okay, first of all, I don't really care about tennis, like, at all, but they seem to take this tennis theme and it's like baked into like the structure of the movie and like how all the time jumping stuff works. It's like a deep like part of these characters and like how they think about like life and love, and the tennis scenes themselves are just really freaking fun and cool and inventive, and far and away elevate the whole like sports movie genre, I guess. The whole movie starts pretty benign, but then they pull everything back, and then you get all this like context for everything, and it makes you think about everything differently. And that's kind of how the whole movie is. They're just gradually revealing more things about these characters, and you get more of an understanding of like how this whole relationship works between these three. And it's all deeply layered, and there's like so many angles to everything and everybody's motivations, and there's deception. I've seen this movie like 3 times at this point, but every single time watching the dialogue scenes, not even like the most intense sports type scenes, but just like scenes where they're talking to each other, trying to like get inside each other's heads. I'm always just like on the edge of my seat, trying to pick up on all these different layers of like manipulation. And I feel like I have to zero in on like everything to fully understand like every facet of this conflict. And I feel like there's still more things I can pick up on, and it makes it super rewatchable. And that's barring like the visceral excitement of like all of the physicality in the movie. The score by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, it is the best one of the year, because I mean I like really like electronic music already, but like come on, it works on so many levels, and it feels so out there for these composers as well, but they do it like so perfectly. And then you look at it and you're like, man, this really was like a perfect concept for this, even though it's unexpected. And how all of that is like paced out and works with the visuals as well is like so intricate when you think about it. There's one scene in here that comes to mind when Zendaya and Josh O'Connor are like making out, and then it basically evolves into them having like a spat, and it's all filmed in one take that evolves with the tone of the scene, and the music starts up like midway through, and it's super energetic as they're going at each other and whip panning between them. So the thing is, with most types of music, you have like 4 beats and like a measure, and you have like motifs, and you'll usually repeat a motif twice, 4 times, or 8 times before you develop it into something else. Because our brains just like that kind of evenness of something doubling up, basically. Especially with visceral genres like dance. So we have this super coordinated scene that's entirely uncut, and the emotions are changing and developing throughout, and the music is evolving with it, but the shifts that the music goes through all seem to fit into this satisfying grid where nothing repeats like too much or too little. It just flows perfectly as a piece of music, and it like changes tones right as the scene itself is also shifting its tone. So like I want to make a movie one day, right? But then I see something like this and I just think like, goddamn, that must be so freaking hard to do. Like, I don't know how they planned it out, if it was the score that came first or like the blocking of the scene, but it's so coordinated and it's so goddamn impressive. I just don't get it. And there are scenes like that throughout the movie too. The final scene especially with like the match, not to spoil anything, but that's easily like one of the most like blood pumping tracks of the whole score, and you only hear it once before that, like the very beginning of the movie, but when it comes back it's awesome, and everything's like building up and they're bringing in the strings and everything, and it's all just so goddamn satisfying. The theme for like Zendaya's character is like super catchy, and again like so out of the ordinary for like Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, but goddamn it works so well. Yeah, it has basically become one of my favorite scores of all time, pretty much. I listen to it a lot, just like outside of the movie as well, and it reminds me of how great the movie is too, and it just brings back all those emotions kind of. I really hope they do more stuff like this in the future, honestly. All the cinematography is great, not just with the insanely like inventive stuff that they're doing. All of the super slow motion is really cool, but also everything has just got a really nice like soft kind of feeling to it. There's a lot of pastel, which also goes in line with like the typography too throughout the film. Luca Guadagnino seems to have like really good skies in his movie. I noticed that with Bones and All. Also just like the very nice soft kind of grain to everything. It's almost like bringing this sort of like indie movie kind of feel to it, to this otherwise like kind of, you know, like sports movie, not really something you associate with pretty aesthetics, you know, but you know that also works with the super gay energy throughout everything too, of course. And the acting too is great, from pretty much everybody, but especially Josh O'Connor, who I think is maybe one of the most like exciting current actors, and I can't wait to see like everything that he does in the future. Basically, he has this really awesome way of playing the same character but like years and years apart, and he looks like totally different from like his younger self and his older self. Just his posture and how he carries his body. When you look at those flashback scenes, it's like so different and so specific. Yeah, I love this freaking movie. Earlier in the year kind of movie, and I wasn't sure if it was gonna stay like one of the absolute favorites, but it did, and here we are. I just keep wanting to watch it again and again, and talking about it now, I kind of want to watch it another time, honestly. And number 1 is Queer. Yup. Same team, basically, same writer, same director as Challengers. And yeah, when after I finished Challengers, I was like, oh, there's another Luca movie coming out later this year. I wonder if that's going to be good. Sure, I'm excited. And yeah, I was not expecting this to be as fantastic as it was, honestly. Even after the first time I watched it, I wasn't expecting to love it so much, like on a second watch, but then I saw it a second time and I was like, holy shit, like no other movie this year has connected with me on such a deep level. Luca has just had such a banger year for himself. I wasn't even a super huge fan of him to begin with, honestly. I like Bones and All. I like Suspiria fine. I haven't seen Call Me By Your Name, actually. But for some reason, just 2024, 2 of the best movies of the year just happened to be this boy right here. And like so incredibly different from each other too. Most great directors that I love, you couldn't expect them to put out 2 movies that contrast so hard in their entire career, let alone just in this one year. Like it's insane. This movie's super underrated as well. I feel like it's got to be the most underrated ones of the year as well. Yeah, this is a William S. Burroughs adaptation, and maybe that's why like it wasn't didn't receive the highest like user ratings because people were maybe expecting something a little different from what it actually is. Because William S. Burroughs is a very experimental novelist. Notoriously experimental, and both of the film adaptations that have come out have partially been, I guess, kind of like biographical type things, and I think this novel is also like pretty biographical. Yeah, once again we have an interpretation of the William S. Burroughs character brought to life for the first time since Naked Lunch, which isn't a movie that I really love, honestly.
I can think of at least 2 things wrong with that title.
But this here, with Daniel Craig playing him, I think it's gotta be Daniel Craig's best performance to date, or at least my favorite. Everything that he's doing is just so specific and so engaging. And he totally just disappears into the role. And I feel like I'm gonna like repeat myself a little bit with the Challengers thing, but also deeply layered. There's such a sadness behind this character and like kind of pathetic attributes to him, even though he has such a command over the screen. And like the character himself seems like he wants to have like this command over all of the interactions that he has, especially with like his love interest. And he always gets a writer kind of energy across with how he talks and weird monologues and stuff. And that goes with like a lot of the other characters in the movie as well, like his kind of friend circle. They all feel very writer-y and pretentious, but it works really well. One of my favorite Jason Schwartzman performances too, honestly. There are awesome like music choices in this whole thing that kind of honestly rival Challengers. When I first saw the movie and like the Nirvana like starts up for the first time as he's walking through the streets, like this is like so cool right now. And they also like pull out kind of a Nirvana deep cut with the song God, what's the song? Is it Marigold? Yeah, it is Marigold. I thought I was wrong about that. Yeah, great track. I love how it's used. The score too, also Trent and Atticus, just as good as the Challengers score maybe, but like also, I mean, there's less songs. It's pretty much the one composition, but it is an amazing composition. It like, yeah, insane production to it as well. Has to be expected, I guess. But you know, the fact that it can use this kind of industrial production style while also just being earth-shatteringly sad, it's fantastic. Every time it plays throughout the movie, it just feels like it's ripping my heart out. I do want to comment on the look of the movie, because they seem to use visual effects and color grading in a way that's kind of amplifying. In that sense, it kind of reminds me of like Poor Things from a couple years ago. Definitely reined back by comparison, but I think it still gets across this kind of fantastical feel to everything, which I think works really well with the haze of this character and his mind state. There's lots of great effects in this movie. There's like miniatures during like the part when they're traveling around and all that. Those are really cool. And also, of course, the sequence towards the end, which I will not spoil, but I guess this is a good time to talk about this movie's structure, which is very unpredictable, and it really kind of lulls you into like this sense of security for the first half, and then once it goes to different places, you know, I'm just gonna say spoilers because I don't like beating around the bush about this anymore. If you haven't watched this movie, please go watch it. It really is freaking excellent and one of a kind. But yeah, eventually it just becomes a full-on like drug trip, because they venture into the jungle of like South America to take ayahuasca pretty much. And it's one of the most realistic depictions of like a drug trip, honestly, because it seems like nothing's happening at first, and they're even, you know, talking to each other about it. They're like, I don't think anything, I think that was just a big waste of time and this isn't gonna have any effect and I don't feel anything. Then like a second later, it's like shit is going crazy. Not just the trip, but like the whole lead up to the trip. There's just a subtle like anxiety and kind of weirdness starting to set in. But yeah, on the first watch, you're kind of starting to, I don't know, you get a little restless with how it's just kind of staying in the same place. You're kind of like, okay, are we just gonna be in Mexico for the whole movie, just kind of hanging out? But on the second watch, that whole section of the movie goes by so much faster, and like knowing what it's leading to just makes it so breezy and so nice. It feels well worth it, honestly. And it really makes you just sort of relax and sit with the emotions of everything and really just like get on board with these characters. And I love just how they interact and all of the awkwardness between them. and how that all kind of eventually leads to this trip that they go on, and how that all kind of pays off. Leslie Manville shows up in the last kind of act, and I had been watching like a bunch of Mike Leigh movies around the time that I saw this and when it came out, and Leslie Manville has basically become one of my favorite actors of all time, and this character performance is so out there and so weird, but it's like insane how well she pulls it off. You barely even recognize her, honestly. And the whole time I was like waiting for her to show up because I knew she was in the movie, and I was like, who's she gonna be? And she happens to be the most crazy character in the whole thing. As if we could get any wilder than the protagonist. You can imagine what their chemistry is like. Overall, the movie is just so good at capturing this feeling of repression and loneliness and longing. You feel it in every corner of Daniel Craig's performance. And it's not even like you're really rooting for their relationship throughout, because there's a lot of red flags here, but it's still just sad to watch this person struggle to connect basically for the whole film. I think that is like a huge part of it, because for basically the entire movie he's talking about how he wants to explore telepathy. He just wants to know what this guy thinks of him and what that says about the character and what it says about both of their repression. I think it's really powerful. And eventually he does reach an understanding. Whether or not he did read his thoughts or if it's just drugs, I guess that's up to interpretation. But either way, it reaches a really satisfying conclusion. Especially with the line, "I'm not queer, I'm disembodied." It's just perfect to me. Yeah, if there's like one thing I could complain about with this movie, I guess there's like a dream sequence in there that isn't super necessary or like super inventive. It just kind of feels like a stab at like a surreal kind of thing that doesn't fully work. And I'm not a huge fan of the fast pace of the editing in chunks of it, but I could see myself feeling differently about it another time. That said, there's also the last sequence in this movie, which is very that, and I think it's beautiful and perfect. And that's pretty much everything I have to say about this movie. I hope it gets reevaluated one day. I hope it becomes a cult classic or something. Please check it out, because I feel like it deserves more attention. And even if you don't like it, I guarantee it will be a unique experience. And so there was the list. That was the list. That was the end of the list. And now you can tell me what sort of list you would make out of the movies you saw in 2024. Yeah, tell me what you think of these movies. Tell me what you think of movies in general. Tell me what you think should have been in the #1 spot instead of queer. Because I don't think anybody's gonna agree with me on that one. I hope you enjoyed the video. See you.